You're listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, the show that invites you into the lives of people who make up the Ultra family. Here's your host for these conversations, Larry Ryan.
Thanks, MJ. Coming up on today's show,
he goes, man, all you gotta, you can run, you can swim, all you gotta do is learn how to bike. I'm a pseudo pilot. And they were tipping in on me, and then they would waggle their wings as they went past. One guy, I saw him saluting me as he went past.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ultra-Triathlon Canada, where you can race the traditional 515, a 515 relay, or a 515 non-stop. There's also a 360K format, which does not require a crew. And because we are hosting you in Whistler, there is also an Ultra Gravel Rail. And if you've always wanted to go to a 515 World Championship, check out the information on the website about our new Worldwide Championships, which is available to every 515 racer of all time. We are now asking athletes to express their interest in attending the 2025 events. Email us at ultratriathloncanada@gmail.com to express your interest in joining us in 2025. This will help us to determine a viable field for each of the events, and you will not have to pay an entry fee until it is confirmed. Again, get the information from ultratriathloncanada.com, proud sponsor of 515 The Ultra Podcast. My Ohana guest today is following on a similar line as the other guests that I've had on this season, whether that's by his occupation, the races he's competed in, or the branches of the Ultra family tree that he's connected to. He's competed in 11 Ironman Canada races between 1985 and 2009. He's also competed in Penticton in 2005 at Ultraman Canada. He did the Canadian Death Race in 2014 and Uberman in 2017. And somewhere within all of that, he also got himself to Kona for the Ironman World Championships. Joining me today from my own backyard in Vancouver, it's Gerard Charlton. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Thanks for inviting me on.
You know, for me, this is kind of cool in that I'm having you on in back-to-back episodes with Tony O'Keefe, another Canadian Air Forces veteran who I know that you know. Can you tell me a little bit about that relationship between the two of you?
Oh man, our friendship goes back a long way. So I can't remember the year, but it would have been in the late 80s, I believe. Ironman Canada. He and I were both in the Air Force together. I was a pilot. He was a weapons sensor operator, working with the fighter squadrons up in Cold Lake, and we both did the Ironman, introduced ourselves to each other, and I would say that we both had the same sort of, I don't know, call it sixth sense of humor, sixth sense of, what do you want to do with yourself? And we just hit it off in a big way. If I went up to Cold Lake, I'd, give him a shout and, head up, meet when his kids were just young. He was a little ahead of me on the family making mode. And, every year, at Penticton, we'd meet up there, and then, and then a lot of the story between us got separate. I left the military in '95, and he carried on. And full respect to all the guys and girls that stay in there and do a full career. I just something changed in my life with my wife and family aspirations and stuff, and we moved on. And I tried to keep in touch, but this is back in the old days when it was snail mail, email wasn't even happening, and. Yeah. But we did sort of, I'd either hear about what he was doing via people like Steve King, or I'd make contact when email came along, and then I'd make contact, and it's almost, it's like an old friendship. It's like if I meet up with him or give him a phone call, it's like 30 years have gone by, but it could have been yesterday. Yeah. We've gone totally different routes in terms of, I guess life. No, we haven't. In fact, we've just recently I was talking to him, and we're talking about, okay, what's next in our agenda? And I'm big into bike. I'd like to get into bike touring more. And Tony goes, have you thought about the Silk Route? And I went, oh. Yeah, I just went, oh, that's just a whole new level. And I'm like, yeah, gonna have to think about that one.
But have you looked at that? What's the distance? What kind of time commitment would you need to put into that?
It's huge. I mean, you could do it in bite-sized chunks, so you could load one run at it. I think it would take a few months. But I was just planning on possibly going over to visit Tony in Italy and just go do some bike touring around there with him because he's just in a beautiful, beautiful spot. And I'd love, if he came back here to Vancouver, I'd take him around and do some stuff. But he's just got, where he's cycling there is just beautiful. And the Silk Route, I did look at it briefly after we mentioned it, and I went, wow. I kind of know what it is, but right. I never really. And then there's Silk Route races, and I wouldn't be into doing the race. There's just some very, very interesting stuff that goes on along there, and of course, every country you go through there. Well, many of them ends with Stan, and there's a few of them that there would be conflicts involved there too. So it'd be right. It'd be very interesting. So that's why I say we're going to WOW on another level. So I don't know if that was a challenge he threw down for me, but.
Well, if you guys do end up seriously starting to look at that, I want the two of you to come back on and tell us all about it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So we were saying that you were in the Air Force, and that's what kind of drew you and Tony together. What was it about the Air Force that you wanted to join the Air Force? Was it because you wanted to fly planes, or was it something else?
Yeah, pretty simple. I wanted to be a pilot, and I knew that. I didn't know that. I sort of came to that conclusion sometime midway through high school. And talked to my parents about it. And it wasn't like I want to be a military, but I just want to be a pilot. Right. And then my dad had mentioned, have you ever thought about the military? And I go, I'm from Greenpeace country, man. I didn't know anything about the military. The first time I saw a military aircraft was a month or two before I went to basic officer training in Chilliwack. I'd done all the screening in the military. I'd gone to the recruiting center, done all the screening to aircrew selection. And I went to the Abbotsford Air Show. Oh, yeah. That was the first time I'd ever seen a military jet. And I was with my wife. Now, she was my girlfriend at the time, but my wife, and and I go, I want to fly one of those. It's just, and I never did operationally really, I don't think I knew it, but I think much of my makeup in life led me towards playing team sports and that sort of thing. Individual and team sports, but once I joined the military, I really found my family, and to this day, I still sometimes very much regret leaving the military because we made the decision to leave, but I was still happy, and I wasn't unhappy in the military. It was just something else that came up, and it was time to leave. So.
And what kind of roles were you in while you were in the military? Did you end up doing any peacekeeping missions? Did you get into any combat zones? Was it all here in Canada? What kind of roles were you in?
Yeah, I was one of the lucky ones. I did not go to any combat zone. Any real conflict. I was involved with peacekeeping, which I was very, very happy with. And it was a turning point in my life, I would say. I was a young fella, 25, I guess, 25 or 26. Yeah, I was 25. And got to see the world and got to see, a couple of significant, what I would call cultures. So I spent a lot of time in Israel and in Egypt. And then traveled a little bit around there too, just on my time off, a little bit of time off that we had. But really did a deep dive into understanding the peoples in those places, and I hate to say it, I think there's a huge amount of maturity that happened by at that age being entrusted with doing that, and respecting people from another part of the planet, and in terms of going to conflict zones and stuff like that, I know people that have done that, and I was just so fortunate. We didn't really get into that in the years that I was. I guess Bosnia did crop up just around the end of my time, and the first Gulf War happened. But I wasn't involved with those.
And now, what is your current occupation? Do you also have some working around planes and stuff like that?
I'm a pseudo pilot. I guess now I'm a Transport Canada civil aviation inspector, and sort of utilized as jack of all trades, master of none. But I'm, because I've got a float plane background, a helicopter background. I've got my military air, so I do aerobatics out here on the West Coast. And I've also spent a little bit of wee time in the airlines. Didn't last very long, and I never figured I was cut out to be an airline pilot, and it proved itself.
Oh yeah. So you say you're a civil aviation safety inspector. Does that mean you are physically inspecting planes?
Yeah, not the planes so much. I'll inspect the operations. Okay. I'm involved with sort of aerodromes, heliports is one of my major portfolios. Although it doesn't take up that huge amount of time in my job, but all the heliports where helicopters will land at hospitals and that sort of thing. We call them H1. That I deal with helicopter, float plane, and fixed wing operators, just not the national carriers so much. So I'll deal with the operations and how the pilots are training and that sort of stuff, and how they do their daily operations. We have airworthiness people, the mechanics side, that deal with the actual airplane inspections. I do airplane inspections too, but just not as robustly, let's say, as my airworthiness colleagues would.
Right. Going back to Tony for a second, near the end of my previous episode that he was on, he mentioned that he wants to purchase a plane in Italy so that he can start flying around in Europe a little bit more. And I know that you own your own plane. So what kind of plane do you fly? Where do you go with it? What range does it have?
Well, I don't own an airplane. I am the custodian of an older, it's a 1942 Piper Cub. And what kind of range and what can you do and where can you go with it? You can't go very far necessarily without refueling. And you don't go very fast, but you can have a very enjoyable time while you're up there doing it. I've flown it. I flew it to Oshkosh shortly after I got it. Back in about 2017 or 18, and which is a long flight. So I'm flying from Vancouver to Wisconsin, just on the edge of the Great Lakes, and that was quite an expedition. And I'd never flown, my own. I'd never actually gone, sort of backpacking with the airplane anywhere until that. I did a couple little test runs, but never actually overnighted. And I basically flew all the way there and back just with a tent. And
Tony mentioned that he wants his to go bike packing. He said he's not getting a plane that doesn't fit the bike.
Yes, mine's just the 2-seater. It's a little tiny thing. It was actually a trainer back in World War II. And so it's just I sit in the back seat. So any passenger that comes along with me gets front seat ride. Like they get the full panoramic viewpoint. And I sit in the back, which I'm used to doing from my military time. So I'm quite happy sitting in the back end, and it's fun watching people do that. But yeah, Tony, a 4-seater I don't have, and trying to I've crammed a guitar into the back end, and I did that when I went to Oshkosh because I like to play the guitar in my spare time if I can.
You said one of the things that's under your purview is acrobatics. How are your skills? Can you pull off some acrobatics in your plane?
Not in my plane. In the Cub, no, I don't want to do that. It's 1942, man. I just want to, like I said, I'm just there to take care of it. When I do aerobatics, I will do them in either other people's aircraft or there is an aircraft that I'll utilize on the coast here for my own use. But what I do is my position actually is I took over from one of my colleagues that retired, is to oversee the instructors and that are teaching aerobatics. So I hand out the instructor ratings and or the renewals. And I can teach people aerobatics too. And then I get a little bit involved with the people that are both doing competitions. So it's quite a different fold. There's the competition aerobatics and then the air show aerobatics. Right. So I get involved with some of them. We also can be involved with aerobatic ratings to the aircraft themselves. So a lot of aircraft are not certified for doing aerobatics initially. Some of the home builds, especially, and then we can walk them through that process of upgrading them so that they can do aerobatics in their home builds. Yeah.
Excellent. So what brought you into multi-sport then? Like, what kind of things were you doing as a child? Were you brought into it by a certain person or a coach, or were you doing one of the disciplines in school? What was going on?
Okay, so I'll try and I don't know if I can wrap this up really quick. So there's the name Dan Fisher, and if anybody in the West Coast might know, or actually, Americans would recognize his son Grant Fisher, who just won a couple of bronze medals at the Olympics. So Dan was a schoolmate of mine going through high school, and when we while we were in high school, I swam, and I was a fairly high level soccer player when I was younger, and I bounced back and forth between swimming and soccer. I was probably more set up to be a soccer player than a swimmer, to be honest. While we were in high school, we had three of the best runners in Canada, really, in our high school. A fellow named Dave Beardsall. We had Dan Fisher and Mike Moran, and they were all just top level runners. But in order to have a team, you had to have four people. Oh yeah. Yeah. And they were always looking. So they'd always try and recruit me to come along because they said, "You're a soccer player and you swim, so you got everything we need. All we need for you to do is finish. That's all you have to do. Like, right. just make sure
we'll be 1, 2, 3. You can be 100. We'll still win."
That's all I had to be. So every year they'd recruit me out to join the cross country team just to go along with them. And all three of them did phenomenally well in their running. I think Dan probably more so than the other two, just in their own rights. So when I finished high school, about a year, I think it was a year out of high school, I bumped into Dan, and he goes, "Hey, have you ever thought about this thing called triathlon?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard about it. I heard about the Ironman." And he goes, "You should do it." He goes, "Man, all you got to, you can run, you can swim. All you got to do is learn how to bike, and you can do that." And anyways, he told me, because he was involved with the Alta Lake club up in Whistler, which, back in those days, there's probably a lot more sailing, cross country. He was a cross country skier as well. And Les McDonald, who, I hope people know that name, was I think either the president of the Alta Lake Sports Club or whatever. And he was running the very first triathlon in Vancouver. Oh. It might have been the first one in Canada. I don't know. It was 1981 or 2. So I went out and I found out that you had to have a helmet. So I borrowed my nephew's hockey helmet, and I was a soccer player. So I went
Canadian of you to get a hockey helmet.
Yeah. Well, and I went out cycling with this fella, a family friend who was a cyclist. I think he was competitive, but he actually rode a bike a lot. And he was showing me that you had to wear these shoes and you put them in a rat trap. And I thought, well, I can't buy those. I didn't have the money or anything like that to do that at the time. But I thought, hey, I could just use my soccer boots. I'll use the cleats in my soccer boots and strap them down, and that'll work. So,
oh my God.
So I went out there I was just going out and having fun. I can't remember. I think I came in like I didn't come in first. I know that I came in like second or fifth or something like that. I just remember there's an American guy that showed up, and he had a tri-suit on. And to this day, I still can't believe, like the rest of us were just like, in our bathing suits and stuff. Right, and I remember finishing the swim down at Spanish Banks, and one of my old buddies from the swim team was a lifeguard there, a guy named Connell Barr. And I stopped and I was talking with him for about a minute or two, just at the end of the swim, because I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. And he goes, "Hey man, this is a race." And I go, "I'll see you later, man." And I get out of the water and go and have a shower, and I'm drying off. And meantime, this other guy's just bolted off on his bike, and I heard about the Ironman. So you go and take care of yourself, right? So you want to dry, make sure you don't chafe and all that sort of stuff, and put all my kit on and got on my bike and off I went. It was looking back on it, it's hilarious. And I was smiling the whole way. It was just fun. And we finished off at the Vancouver Rowing Club, or I think, down in Cole Harbor there.
Yeah.
And just like, okay, I'm sold on this. This is great. This is a lot of fun. And Yeah, I was, and then you know what? Honestly, it kind of died there for a few years because I joined the military and I got into the training system and I really didn't have the time to devote to this until a few years later. But yeah, it's good fun. It was good memories of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story of just making do with what you got.
Yeah,
I
over the
would,
years.
if you ever find a photo of that, please send it over.
I definitely, I've got old photos of that. Yeah, I had to borrow my sister's bike too. So we had, the old 10-speed, right? It was a, I don't know what you call it, Jitane. I think it was a Jitane or something like that. It had the center pole brake, the ones up on top of the handlebar too,
Yes,
because it was like a cruiser for going around the city. And yeah, it was great.
Well, that hooked you in at least. And when I was looking at your race history, it looks like there is kind of a pre-Ultraman race history and a post-Ultraman race history. And it looks like your pre-Ultraman is all your Ironman races and stuff like that. And then it kind of changes as it does once you discover there's longer distances and stuff like that. So maybe we'll come back to the longer stuff in a bit. But I want to hear a little bit about your Ironman history, because you were like in one of the first Ironman races here.
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of them in Penticton. Tell me a little bit about how your Ironmans went here.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so it all came down to like I'd been bit by the bug, and then I went through my military pilot training, and then I came out of that, and I was had my first posting, and I spent that year trying to overcome something a doctor had told me that they figured I'd never run again because I had a little bit of a knee issue that had come up at some point, I think, from my military training. Mm-hmm. And they just said, well, you just can't run anymore. And I said, well, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. So I spent that year and I had in the back of my mind, I wanted to. So back in the early days of the Ironman, I mean, you'd send out a snail mail in like March or April. I remember a springtime or something like that. And I just mailed this in with a $300 check to see if I could join this race. There's a few people I know that did the first couple of years. I was in the third year, 1985. Yeah. And I think there was 125 of us that did it. And I know this goes completely against the grain of most people these days, but I'd never ridden my bike more than 100 kilometers. I'd just never gotten around to doing it. I'd never officially run a marathon, and in fact, I've hardly ever done one. But I did an unofficial one in the early years in Vancouver. I got out of high school and I decided I want to do a marathon. So I just threw my shoes on one day, and when they had the marathon, I just sort of jumped in there, unofficially and just ran along with them. They wouldn't let me cross the finish line at the end. And I said, that's fine. I don't care. I just wanted to see if I could do 26 miles. and I was lucky they gave me some water along the way. But anyway, so I did 1985, and then I did 86, 87, and I missed 88 because I was on peacekeeping. And then I did 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. It was basically an annual religious experience for me, the way I used to say. I used to tell people, this is my one day a year. I just go out and I get to talk to God for a couple hours or a day or whatever. Yeah. Or talk to my maker, if you want to call it that, if you don't believe in God. But which is fine. And 85 I think I came in fifth or sixth. I can't remember, to be honest. It was one of these things. I just got bit by the bug. I went out, I did it. I had swum the lengths that were required there, but I'd just never done the bike. And certainly I never done a run off a bike like that. And most of us, most of the people back then, it was an adventure. Nobody really knew how to train. There was a couple of people, I think, that did. Some of the early winners, definitely, you could tell that they had trained, they knew what they were doing, and the rest of us were just taking a wild stab at it, right? And how much time can you devote to this new sport, whatever. Right. And then it quickly accelerated. I remember going back in 86 and 87 and stuff, and it was ramping up pretty fast. It became Ironman Canada in 87, I think, maybe 86. And I can think of a few names, people that were friends too. I remember running into Tom Price and I were both doing just a sort of a fun fundraiser, both, I think the 25th anniversary maybe. And I bumped into him out in the run, and I don't know if he recognized me as much as I recognized him, but he and I, sort of raced against each other. if you want. And he would beat me, but we were out there just running. We were in the middle of the pack, just running along because we were just in it for the, to be there and to raise money. I was doing it for Iron Cops, and Tom was doing it for other reasons, I guess. But he was a machine back in the early days. He was just doing stuff that many of the rest of us weren't. And I could name any number of other people that I was involved, either racing with or training with. Steve Wallach, who was the world's fastest Clydesdale at one time, so he was 200 pounds plus. And he was a 9-hour Ironman at his weight class, if you want. A phenomenal athlete, that guy. Natural. He was a rugby player, actually, to begin with, and just converted into being an absolute machine in the Ironman. And a good friend of mine, because we were both. He's from Moose Jaw originally, and I was in Moose Jaw as a pilot. And so we didn't really train together, but we went out training a little bit. And some funny stories, getting chased by cows and through fields, and running for our life and diving through fences and stuff. There's some very funny stories from back then.
Yeah, for the listener outside of Canada, Moose Jaw is in the prairies in Canada. It's in Saskatchewan. Yeah. Well, I know that you were up in Penticton a couple of weeks ago for the final Ironman race. Yeah. What are your thoughts on it coming to an end up there?
Oh, it's kind of sad. I think most people would say that. It was just fabulous going up and meeting some of the people that I hadn't seen some for many years, and of course, chief amongst them is Steve King.
Of course.
And a lot of people think of Steve as the voice of Ironman. I just have an amazing amount of respect for that man and his wife, and the people around him. Gene, Steve, to me, he's the addictions counselor. He has saved so many people. It's unfathomable. I couldn't even begin to think, how he's affected lives in that way. That's the way I see him first and foremost. He's also an incredible athlete. His track record is just amazing, and a lot of people don't know that. I can't even begin to. We could talk about his accomplishments there for a whole hour. But he's also been a mentor for me, because he was the one that he knew that I'd sort of given up on racing, and he knew that I liked the idea of challenges. I talked to him about it, and he was the one that told me what Tony O'Keefe was up to with this new Ultraman thing. Right. And while I was in Saudi Arabia, living there and working there with a young family, and when email sort of came up and we got in touch, I sort of re-engaged with people a little bit, because now we could email. And Steve said, "Hey, have you heard what Tony's up to?" And I go, "No, I have no idea." And he told me, and I went, "Holy smokes!" And he gave me the whole lowdown briefing on it. And then he sort of, he suggested to me, he goes, "It's right down your alley, Gerard. You like to race a course. You don't want to race people. You just want the challenge, right?" And I go, "Absolutely." And he said, "So this is for you." And he was spot on. And just, a few, not a lot, just gentle words of wisdom and advice. And that's really all I got from that. He knew that. That's all I needed. And then we were off to the races, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. For people that may have picked up listening to the podcast a little bit later, my first 3 episodes all have Steve King on them. The episode 1, it's all about his athletic career. Episode 2 is all about his announcing career, and episode 3 is all about his kind of family life. So people that know Steve King and maybe don't know the whole background of those things, check out episode 1, 2, and 3 from season 1, and you can learn a lot more about Steve, because he does bring a lot of people into this, and he supports so many people in that fantastic way where he builds everybody up to be a rock star when he's out there announcing at these Ultraman 515 events in particular. Even at the Ironman, I know he spots people coming down the road, and even if he didn't have it written down, he's going to tell you something about those guys that he remembers from years ago. And it's always the most important thing to athletes is when Steve King calls them in. So,
and I will just add one thing there is if you get to know him, and it's not for everybody, and I don't want to start sending hundreds of people to go talk to Steve, but when you get to know him, you learn about life. truly. He's
Right.
one of those. He and Gene. You realize you're in grace, in good grace. Yeah.
Hello, listener. I love getting your feedback and suggestions for the podcast. Keep them coming at 515ultraman@gmail.com. For those that want to help me promote the show, I suggest that you tell a friend to listen to. Word of mouth is a great way for podcasts to get new listeners. And if you don't mind publishing your feelings, a free way to support the show is by leaving a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. It's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Finally, if you're so inclined, you can show your appreciation for my work by clicking the support link at the bottom of the show notes to go to my Buy Me a Coffee page. Thanks for all of your feedback and support. Now back to the show. So leading into this, I said you kind of had your pre-Ultraman racing where you were, competitive and doing Ironman to the extent that you were competitive. Maybe getting out of the water and having a chat is not super competitive, but it kind of changed after Ultraman for you, where you've gone on to more of these events and completing an event versus doing a race. Tell me a little bit about some of these other events that maybe you were doing at the time that meant something to you and why you were doing them.
Okay, so I'll start off with a bit of a backstory if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So 1994 was my last, what I would call my competitive Ironman. And I consider it to be almost the perfect race for me. I bonked with about 10 kilometers to go. But unbeknownst to me, I was in 10th place amongst the pros. I was doing pretty well. I was, I was, and I bonked and I still did about a 320 marathon, but I was almost on a 3 hour. But it was the first time I'd ever used a heart monitor. But I came to the realization that I'd spent many, many years just trying to get 5 minutes faster, 10 minutes, maybe beat my last year's time or whatever. And my wife and I really were trying to have a family at the time, and it just wasn't happening. And we found out that there were other reasons for it. It wasn't because I was busy racing, but in the end, we've got a lovely family now. But I went away from that year, and I thought there's got to be something more to this. And I floated to Tony O'Keefe the idea that, they've got, and I think it was that year, somewhere along the line, we had this conversation. It was before Tony got into the RAM. And I said, the Americans got that race across America. I said, we could be doing something bigger in Canada, man. We could have the race across Canada. And I said, we could go across Vancouver Island, swim from Vancouver Island over to the mainland, bike across Canada, run Newfoundland, 1,500 kilometers, I think, from toe to toe. And I said, just connect all the dots. And I said, one caveat, it's got to be for charity. There's no money in it. It's not a money thing. It's to get in, you got to. And then I started doing it. Tony just laughs and he goes, okay, I tell you, man, bit of a logistical one. When you figure it out, get back to me. I'm all in. It's kind of like, drop the gauntlet. Let's do it. And I started looking at the logistics. I'm going to go, wow, man, it's just like, how the amount of time somebody have to dedicate to this, the amount of money it's going to cost. And I said, I only wanted to do it if it was for a charity thing. And I did. I looked into it, not at great length, but I was trying to figure out how could we do this and how could you I'm not a marketer. And it just sort of died. So it's in my mind. It's always been in my mind that wouldn't that be a great thing to do? But yeah. And then Tony went on into, bigger and better things and did the RAM and I didn't.
Yeah. Well, I saw recently that they're doing a race across India now as a RAM qualifier.
Yeah. There's some great things out there. And so in answer to your question, so yeah, I did, there's a little bit of philanthropic sort of charity side to me that my mom imbued in all of us as we were growing up with 5 kids in my family. And I said, if I'm going to do this again, I got to do it for, a higher reason. And I don't mean to, come off sounding like anything. I just said, in order for me to be motivated, I do like the challenges. I just don't want to do it for myself. I don't want it to be a selfish thing. I want to do it for, and so Ultraman Canada, 2005, that was it. I got involved with several charitable organizations, and a lot of that was in part due to coming back to Canada after being away for about 10 years, 9 years, and seeing some of the sad changes I was seeing on the streets. Youth, I had some friends that were police, and they would talk about Covenant House and how great a job they did taking kids that, had maybe been kicked out of their house as youth or whatever, or found themselves on the street, and picked them up and got them back on their feet, ideally or hopefully. And
this is an organization in downtown Vancouver.
Yeah, Covenant House is it's well, I think it's across Canada really, but I'm more connected
the one
to
that you were associated with, right?
Vancouver, yeah. And then there was Franciscan Sisters of the Atonement was one for that dealt with a lot of the soup kitchens and things like that, and dealt with helping generally mostly the men. And then there were there's a few other organizations too. Those were the two main ones that I did for 2005. I had connections with them, and I thought, let's run with it. Let's go that way. And it was, whether you believe in, and I don't mean to get religious on anybody, but I am spiritual to a greater degree, and in terms of dealing with humans, and it was spiritually one of the most. It was uplifting, man. I met some incredible people that year, and I finished that event. And I just thought, wow, I found myself. This is it. I love it. I didn't really care how I did. I just wanted to finish whatever I was putting my mind to, and wanted to raise money and wanted to have a good time while I did it, and did all that. I had my kids supporting me in the race. So I've never had, I was listening to Tony O'Keefe's podcast. He's talking about the crews and stuff. Yeah, he's had some machine work for crewing. And, I'd have my kids out handing me bottles and stuff on the side. And,
it takes all kind in those events. There's a lot of people that do that.
Yeah. And for me, it was generally good. I've really maybe had one or two bad, instances in whatever things that I've done in all the years. But for the most part, it's always, let's go out there, have fun. And I always say, if I was doing an Ultraman or anything like that and the family was involved, I get a chance to go out and just train for fun. And get my family to support, like they're out there supporting me, which is, I'm not taking any time away from them. Well, maybe I am, but they're out there, cheering me on, and which is cool. And so, it was great.
Yeah. One of the things that people enjoy about listening to the podcast that they tell me is that they get to hear about new and different races. And I know that you've done one that is a little bit different for people that aren't from Canada. They might not have even heard of this. And that's the Canadian Death Race. You get the most ominous name you can for a race, and people will sign up, I think is what the saying is. So you did that one in 2014. I'd like you to tell us about that, but before you do, can you just tell us what the race is?
Yeah, it's a race through the Rocky Mountains, basically. We call it 3 mountain peaks, really. It's 125K, I think. So basically 3 marathons, and you could pretty much call one marathon over each mountain peak, up and around each mountain peak, just to put it in simplistic terms. It was my first real crack at an ultra marathon. I'd never done anything quite like that. And I had an old Air Force friend that decided to do it with me, a fellow named Gord Evans, good guy, and his family came out. And I did that one it was a fundraiser for a cause that I don't care to get into right now, but it kind of went pear-shaped. I thought I had trained. I trained my running up pretty good. I didn't realize the kind of steepness that I was getting involved with, and I've always had back and neck issues. Going back many years, and it's not to do with my sports, it's to do with other things, construction and many other activities I've been involved with, but dumb, stupid tricks as a teenager and stuff like that. But it's a pretty
gnarly course, right?
Yeah, it's extremely
dangerous at night.
Well, the steepness going up and down was so much so that you're literally falling down. They've got one route that's called the butt slide or the bum slide, and like you don't slide, you fall down it. Like I remember going down, and I was grabbing for trees as I was falling down the hill. Like I was trying to grab tree branches, stop myself from literally tumbling and rolling down the hill. Going up was like, it wasn't rock climbing, but for those that have done it before, they'll say, "Oh, you're making it out to be worse," but than it is. But it was I remember parts of it. You were sort of on your hands and knees, almost like trying to climb up you couldn't walk it, or run it. You had to grab for branches and stuff to haul yourself up, and for quite a distance too, like maybe a 800 or 1,000 meters of it, quite a distance, and it beat me up pretty good. And that was my if there's any learning lessons that I've ever had. And I called Tony up after this too, because he's now the machine. He was the guy I knew that had done a lot of the stuff. And I got rhabdomyolysis, like extreme rhabdomyolysis, to the point, well, my kidneys failed. And at the end, I didn't know it, and they had to medevac me out of there. And a nephrologist that had to deal with me in Edmonton said he had never seen anybody like that, other than somebody that's been trapped under a building for 7 days in Iran. He was an Iranian, and he just couldn't get his head wrapped around why I would have done this to myself. And so we actually had a really good friendship at the end of that. We spent 3 days. I was close to being on dialysis. He pumped me full of fluids, and really what it all came down to, I know that there's a doctor on the course that was thinking about taking me off the course partway or near the end. And I kept proving to him that I could go to the bathroom and stuff. But what I realized was voiding is every bit as important as drinking your fluids. Like hydrating is good, but if you're not voiding, you're slowly building up stuff in your kidneys. And if you don't void it, and so I know I wasn't voiding enough early on in the race or midway through. And by the end of it, I was done. And there's several things that happened to me there. I couldn't eat, and I couldn't sleep. And then I got in a pool, and I got sick. And that's when my buddy's wife said, "Gerard, I want you to go to the clinic. We're going to take you to the clinic." And I went in there, and huge learning experience there. And I can't say enough to anybody that's doing these things that when you get out there, you can't think that just hydrating is enough. It's not. So I've been living with that ever since. I recovered very quickly. In fact, they were going to do a medical journal on my recovery because they couldn't believe how quickly I recovered. Like 6 weeks later, they figured I was done for like a year or so, because my levels were so high. My, what do they call it? PK levels or something were just astronomically high. And 6 weeks later, the doctors were all going like, "You're perfectly healthy. We can't stop. Like, take it easy. Get back in the pool, and if you want, but." But don't, like you had a really bad episode with your kidney. So I've been taking care of myself ever since that. Yeah. So,
well, that's the other thing that people listen for is some good advice for how to do these sorts of races. So that's good advice. I like that one.
Yeah, well, and sometimes I guess I didn't do enough research on the race and knowing exactly what I was up against, because I've known people that, like, I did a lot of hill training. Right. A lot of hill training before I went there, but I didn't do like super steep hill training, which is what I should have been doing. Yeah. And that bit me. And so, I can't say I've been the smartest trainer and racer over the years. And every once in a while you get bit by that, right? So there you go.
And I think that race has like 15,000 feet of elevation in it.
I don't know. I can't remember. It was pretty big. And there are some people that go there every year and they know what they're up against. If I went back, I would know what I'm up against. I just went there maybe a little bit too overconfident that, I can do this. I can do a double or a triple. I just dial it back a little bit, but I wasn't ready for the inclines and declines. So it just beat the pulp out of my body. Yeah.
Well, the race was trying to live up to his name for you.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Another big race that you've done, and earlier this season we had Melissa Uri on talking about this race as well. She was the first woman to do the race, is Uberman. I don't know if you know her, but that was another fundraiser for you. So maybe tell us how that race kind of went for you and what your thoughts are of doing Uberman and what you were fundraising for. Because again, sorry, worldwide audience, this is kind of a close to the heart, close to home one for people from Vancouver.
Yeah, well, first off, I have never met Melissa, but we've sort of had a little bit of contact. I know she's a mother now. She's had a young child since she did her event, and congratulations to her on that. It's a big thing. You've gone over the Uberman, so I guess people will know what that was. I was the third person to do it. The first person was a good friend of mine from my 2005 Ultraman Canada days, Giorgio Alisi. Yeah. A great guy, funny guy, very adventurous guy, and who I've sort of tried to keep in touch with over the years. And his brother Ricardo as well. Ricardo was his crew manager, I guess, in Penticton back in 2005. Just lovely Italian guys, like good guys, yeah. always loving life and having fun with it. And they seem to have continued to do so. So Giorgio, I remember reading about this challenge, and that's all it is. It's not a race. It was a challenge. So Dan Burku, who put it on, just decided he wanted to make the toughest sort of triathlon kind of thing that you could come up with. And so he proposed this as a challenge. And I remember reading about it thinking, oh man, who would do that? I'm thinking it's kind of cool, but it's a little bit nut bar. Who would do that? And then there was an Outside Magazine article, and Giorgio and he did it with his girlfriend, just one person supporting him the whole way. And he didn't do it fast, and he wasn't trying to do it fast. He was just doing it. And I after when I read that article, I thought, okay, well, I got it. So I called him up and I said, Giorgio, explain to me this whole thing. How did it go? So he, without going into too many details, he explained, he just had a sail. He and his girlfriend got a friend of theirs to take a sailboat over to Catalina Island, and that's what he had for getting him. And then when he did the biking and running, he just had his girlfriend with him. So they weren't at nighttime at all because he didn't want his girlfriend out there at night. Girlfriend or wife? I think it was girlfriend. I'm not too sure. So he finished it, and that was great. And then there was another fellow that did it the following year. I think there was 2 or 3 people that tried, and one person finished. And that's when I sort of got the bug. I go, okay, I've talked to Giorgio. So I tried it on the third year that it sort of went. And I ended up being the only guy towing the line that third year. I think there was a few others that had shown interest and had talked about doing it, but in the end, I was the only guy there. And yeah, I had aspirations of doing it like an ultra, and I didn't in the end because I had my wife basically supporting me like Giorgio had. I also had a sister-in-law sort of off and on that was available, 2 sisters-in-law that were sort of in and out of the picture because of various reasons. But really Stephanie was the one doing all the support. The swim I had a great support actually, and just friends from all over sort of came out. I had a paddler, an old friend of mine from the Air Force, Pete McIntosh, came out and he paddled through the night for me, and along with another fella. It was a really great, again, a very sort of spiritually uplifting experience, if you want. And that one I did. That one, okay. In terms of why I did that, that was for the Canucks Hospice, Canucks Children's Hospice, in we call it Canuck Place in Vancouver, and
supported by the Vancouver Canucks NHL hockey team.
Yeah, and it's a hospice is what it is, and it's really it's for families and the children that when life is short. And we'd had a few friends that had to go through the experience there, and I had seen it myself what was being done. And since then, I've run into several old friends that have lost children that spent their final months, weeks, days at the hospice, and I've never met more beautiful people than the people that are there that help out the families. So it's almost, it almost chokes me up sometimes thinking about it and stuff. And I didn't raise a huge amount of money, but I think it was somewhere over $20,000. But just every step of the way, it was just all about, this is a journey. We're doing this for this reason. And the people I met, and the whole way along, that's all I was thinking. I've got to finish the race because I'm out here doing this. I'm not trying to break any records or anything like that. We're going to do this. And it worked out well. We didn't do it ultra style. We only did it during the day. So I was sleep every night because I didn't want to just kill my wife either. And we had the dog. We had a motorhome, and anybody else that was coming along, I was going to make them go through the night. And that was actually pushed by the race director. I had a rough swim. I was sicker than a dog out in the ocean. I've been ocean training here in Vancouver, but when I got out in the ocean there in Catalina Channel at night, I just I've never been so sick in my life, and it went on for hours and hours and hours, and it took me forever to get across. What should have been a 10-hour swim, maybe a 12-hour for me, turned into a 16-hour ordeal.
Wow!
And I got to the end of the swim, and congratulated by Dan Burko, and he just looked at me and he goes, "You're not going to try and ultra this, are you?" And I said to him, "Well, that was the plan." And he goes, "Don't." He just goes, "You know what? You're here by yourself. Just enjoy it. Do it during the day. And let your family enjoy it too. You're not in a race here. Just finish it." And I looked at him and I go, "You know what? You're right. I'm not here to prove anything to anybody. This is cool." And so we got to see the whole thing during the days, and it was a wonderful experience in many ways. So can't say enough good about it.
Yeah, and if people didn't listen to episode 4 this year, when Melissa was describing it, it's the Catalina swim. Then you bike to the start of the Badwater ultra marathon, and you run the Badwater ultra marathon. That's the whole thing. So
yeah, well, and the beautiful thing about that is I'd always wanted to do a channel swim, and you get to do it there. And I'd always thought Badwater was a nut bar event to do, and I couldn't do it in June or July, but to get to do it in October. You get to do, like, you're not racing it with everybody else, but you get to do the event. And I thought, awesome. You just get to, I couldn't think of a better event to do.
Yeah. When you did have people passing you on the road for the run, because I mean, the bike's the bike. People see people on bikes, but you don't see people running Badwater. Unless they're in the race, usually. Were people looking at you a little strange? Were they asking if you're okay and stuff like that? Or
I think so. Okay, the stories to get into that. So when I first started, so we were in Badwater Basin, and there's a lot of traffic going directly into the basin. So there's a lot of people we went by, and I was trying to build up my own personal energy by, waving at them and stuff. Cause they're wondering what the hell I'm doing out here. And I'm just like, I'm out here having fun, man. I'm just going for a run. Yeah. And, the first marathon that I was on there. And then once you got away from the basin, the traffic thinned out quite a bit, or people were just like on their way to Vegas or something like that. You see a lot of old rat rod motorcycles and stuff out there. And then I remember the climb out of Panamint Springs, traffic, you're on a twisty, windy highway, and I was doing everything I could just to keep my knees together because the road, there was not a level piece of road on
cambered off.
Yeah. It was totally cambered off, and it was hard. My knees just, so I was just switching back and forth on the road to get different cambers to give my knees a break. And then we got up on the high plateau there. And I'll tell you, in terms of what people thought or knew, to this day, I don't know who did this, but I know somebody did, is that, and it had been 23. How long since I'd been in the military? So about 25 years since I'd been in the military, maybe closing on 25 years anyways. And somebody, one of my old buddies who had a connection down with the United States Air Force or Marine Corps or whatever, the flight path through the Rainbow Canyon goes into the China Lake Weapons Range. And I had these F-18s coming across, and they knew where I was. They were actually doing tip-ins, like they were using me as a target.
Oh, wow.
And they were tipping in on me, and then they would waggle their wings as they went past. One guy, I saw him saluting me as he went past.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I'll tell you, man, I could see it through the canopy. And I'll tell you, man, I get shivers up my spine now thinking about it. It was, it's like the highest form of honor, really. Mm-hmm. And Yeah.
That is
So,
so
and
cool.
and I thought I knew who might have done it, but nobody's fessed up to it. And that would be the military, the old boys club. They knew they had me, and I
Right.
will never know who did that. But somebody, they were watching, because we had a spot tracker going, so they could follow us where we were.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so they were feeding the coordinate. They must have been feeding the coordinates to the guys, because they were definitely. I could see them coming in, and they would target me, and they come in and they pull up and they'd wave off. It was very, very cool. So that was mind blowing.
Yeah.
Watching a series of F-18s and that sort of type of aircraft. It's great.
That's amazing. That's cool.
It was cool. Yeah, there's actually a little bit of footage from it. All they've got is one of them blasting off. So they've gone past, they've done the WAG, and they're just gone. And somebody finally pulled out a camera, because normally they take you totally by surprise, right? It's just they'll come up behind you, or they might come in front, but you only see them as they're tipping in on you. Mm-hmm. And somebody just got it. I think there's a quick video sequence of just them going off into the distance after they'd blown past us. But that was fun.
Again, if you have that, if you can send it to me, I can use that as part of the advertising.
I think there is a YouTube link there, and I don't know whether YouTube allows you to dub into them a little bit. But yeah.
I can.
Anyways, there you
go. And that it's really cool that all these years later, you have these Air Force people saluting you on this adventure that you're on, and your life has kind of, as you've told us, gone through these phases. And you're into this point now where you're just doing it for the adventure, doing it for a higher cause, helping out these charities and things. And I know, I'm not sure exactly when you adopted it, but maybe early on, you did take a Canadian Air Force motto, which you carry with you through your adventures. Can you tell us about that?
Okay, well, I would say, there's an oath to the Queen that we all swear as an officer anyways, and being in the military. But the Air Force motto, the Canadian Air Force motto, is per ardua ad astra, which means through adversity to the stars. And my bike, I've actually got back in 2006, I got a custom made bike for me. I just thought I'd been getting bugged. I did 2005 Ultraman, and I was the only guy with a steel bike there. Everybody else had newfangled bikes, and I still was riding my 1987.
Oh, hold
Marinoni.
on, wait a second. Wasn't Nick Millette in that race? He didn't have any fancy bike. He borrowed one from somebody when he got there.
Yeah, well, I don't know. But he was one of the guys who was bugging me about it. So Nick and I have been pretty good pals for a long time. He and I, just going back, he and I did the first marathon of that day together, and we talked about nothing but brewing beer and stuff. So it was just he and I sharing, and all I said to him was, I just want to do this first marathon in 4 hours. That's all. Just do a 4-hour marathon, and then whatever happens after that happens. And we ran the whole, and we got to the end of the first. Anyway, so yeah. So I was bugged by just about everybody there. That I was the only guy that had a steel bike, and it was my 1987 Marinoni that had just been my trusted steed forever. And I thought,
with the bear traps and the soccer shoes.
Yeah. Well, so that next year, prior to me, I ended up with a very big medical issue the next year. But prior to that happening, I went out and I sussed out a local guy that was building bikes, and named Randy Cunningham. And he, when I met him, he was a bit of a military geek kind of guy. He just loved military stuff. He goes, "Wait, you're in the Air Force?" And so my bike is an ode to my Air Force time. It's called High Flight. Nice. Which is an Air Force poem, if anybody wants to read up on that. The bike has the Avro arrow on the side, and it's got High Flight written on it. And then it's got my name with my my Air Force nickname on it, and it's got Air Force Roundel on it. And then on the chainstay, strategically placed where when you're at your very worst, dragging yourself, up a hill and your head's hanging down, looking down at chainstay, I've got per ardua ad astra on it. So when things are bad and you're looking down at your feet and at your chainstay, I just look at that and I go through adversity to the stars. That's it.
Excellent. Yeah. When you look back on your sporting career, can you think of times when you might have had to face some adversity? I know that a lot of people that do these events, they've come out of some adversity or they've been in dark places, and they take these on as a substitute sometimes, or a filler, or move one addiction to training addiction.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily happened for you, but is there anything along the way that kind of fits into any of those stories, or an adversity along the way that has made it so that you can do these things, that you can go these long distances, you can go into these dark places that people do when they're racing, and come out the other side? Maybe that's just your military background, but what do you think it is for you that helps you get to those finish lines?
I don't know about me. I'd say in general, I think you touched on a few things. I've met a lot of people in the ultra world that have got demons that they're running with or from, and that's okay. In my mind, they're doing the healthy thing. They've found, they've got a obsessive compulsiveness of some sort, and they deal with it by training, which I think is cool. I don't know if I've got that same thing, but I've met many people that deal with it in that way. And, I could even name names, but I won't. And in my own case, I've had a neck nerve issues since I realize now, after being diagnosed when I was 40 years old with this neck condition. I was grounded off flying ejection seats because the doctors, when I came up with this nerve problem, they did an MRI and they looked and they said, like, you can't fly ejection seats. And I said, why? And they said, because if you eject, it's not a matter of if, but you will paralyze yourself. You have a very, very bad, neck spinal cord issue. And it now that I look back, or, over the years, I've realized that I've probably been dealing with these nerve issues up in my neck for a long, long time. And I'm lucky, just darn lucky I didn't eject, because, there's a number of things I've said over the years that I'm lucky to be alive, but there've been several times where, I should be in a wheelchair, actually, like, according to the doctors, because I came very, very close. There was one time where I should have ejected and I didn't. I made a snap decision. And in the heat of the moment, I didn't. And I was lucky. We pulled out. It was a student that shut an engine down on me, and I got it relit. And we were already below the ejection envelope to begin with, and or just on the edge of it. And if I had ejected at that time, and I didn't avoid the ejection because I didn't want to. It's just I made a snap decision to restart the engine, and I'd followed through with it. But if I had ejected, I probably would be in a wheelchair right now. So just very lucky, just fate. I didn't make the decision because I knew that I had a compromised neck. I've had several things that have happened. And after the 2005 Ultraman, I was sold on Ultraman. I wanted to do it. I've been invited to Hawaii and everything. And I thought, okay, we're going to do this for the future. Well, that very next year, it was a construction related incident. I did a heavy lift one day, and I pinched the nerves up in my neck so badly that I lost all the muscle on the right side of my body. Like I looked like a prepubescent boy. And it looked like I had a stroke. My right hand was curled up. I couldn't sign my signature or anything like that. And it was like that for a couple of months, a solid month anyways. And then it started to settle out a little bit, but I had to teach myself how to swim again. Like I couldn't even hold my arm up in the air. Like if I pushed off the wall in a pool, one arm just fell back. My right arm just fell back. So I became I jokingly said I was one of the world's best one-arm butterflyers, because I was just in the pool, just practicing and doing one-arm backstroke, one-arm butterfly, and just trying to teach my shoulder how to lift my arm again. It took me a year, and I've never fully recovered from that. I'd say I'm about like 90% recovered. If I swim full on, I swim like a salmon. I wiggle and stuff because one arm's stronger than the other. And so that was a bit of adversity. When I say that, I know people that have gone through way worse. There's a fellow named Devashish Paul, Dev Paul, an old Air Force friend again. And that guy's just, and he's back in the game now. He's had some just incredibly horrific things that have happened to him. And a couple of years ago, he couldn't even walk. And he got run over by a bus at one time. His arm got crushed, but he's back in the game. He's doing Ironman and half Ironman, and he's just loving it and doing very well for himself in life. Just love hearing success stories like that, just through adversity, right? we're not in a race anymore. We're out there doing it. And I've recently had another couple little episodes with nerve related things. And it's, I think we had a brief discussion there earlier. I broke my neck 3 years ago. Of all things, I was just trying to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I passed out on the way to the toilet and slammed my head into a door. Yeah, that was a bit of a wake up call there too, because I was down on the ground, paralyzed for 5 minutes. I recovered like anybody else that had broken their neck. Took me 6 weeks, and I probably got a bit of a sore neck now than I used to have. So you just got to take care of it. I mean, I'm not getting any younger either, right? So, whatever.
But what is it like in those 5 minutes when you're lying on the floor? People have had like maybe a stinger before or something, and they can't lift their arm. But what was it like for you?
Well, I know what it feels like to be paralyzed, and all I can say is I have nothing but respect for the people that have to, mind-blowing respect for the people that are there doing their therapy, trying to get their legs working and their arms working again, because I've never it's not even close. The mental neuron firing that was going on there was shocking. You're there and you're awake. I came to is what happened. And my son thought I had died. He was down there. I was in a pool of blood and I was unresponsive. And,
oh my gosh.
And then he didn't know I was alive until I groaned, because there's the whole pile to the story. But and then I said, just let me try, and I said I can't move. And they my wife and daughter and son were just standing there, and I was I was trying to make things work, and I can't say there's a lot of physical workload there, but the mental, trying to make neurons fire that you should be able to move, and they're not moving, and you just come on, move, and so when I see pictures of people that are that are paras or whatever, or working on a parallel bar system and trying to move their limbs, I can relate to it a little bit. I can't really relate, but I've been there, I've done it. And when I went to see the doc, my wife was with me when we saw the MRI of 2 spikes that went into my spinal cord, or temporarily paralyzed me. And
oh, wow.
And so you could see it in the MRI. And I just looked at the doctor and I go, so I guess I'm pretty lucky, eh? And he goes, yup.
You're like a cat with 9 lives.
Well, yeah, just whatever. Just every day I wake up, I just go, yep, still here, man. This is good. Let's carry on, right?
Yeah. And I understand that you kind of had it diagnosed, or you figure it had something to do with the fact that as a trained athlete, you're got a low resting heart rate, and maybe you just got up too quick when you went to the bathroom. Is that what it was?
Well, yeah. So a little bit of my pilot training came in. So yeah, when I was in the hospital there, when I was in the emergency room, the nurse is going, this happens more often than you think. And I go, really? I've never heard of anybody having these problems. She goes, oh, it happens. And then we start talking about it. And it comes back to even my training in the Air Force as a pilot with G loadings and stuff, with the blood going to and from your head. Right. So you're in a prone position and you got a low heart rate. Your blood pressure's down to nil. Mm-hmm. And then you sit up quickly and got to go to the bathroom. So I've been doing that. I've, had little issues, if you want to call it that. I've been going to the bathroom in the middle of the night since I was in my 20s. Some people don't get that until they're midlife or whatever. But so I've got it down to a T where I just go there, come back, get into bed, and go back to sleep within minutes, and it doesn't even faze me. Mm-hmm. And I guess I just got up too quickly that one night, and yeah, I had a full dream as I was going down. I remember thinking, why am I falling? But it was a dream. Why am I falling in my dream? Wow. And then it was just like getting hit by a baseball bat. It just went smack, and my head went right back, and I was out and groaning. But yeah, I'm going off on a tangent there.
It's all right. Yeah. I like that story. So what are you up to these days? People that are in these lifestyles, they don't give them up. They don't stop cold turkey. If you've been in multi-sport for this many years, what kind of activities are you doing these days? Do you have any events or adventures that you're got on the plans other than, race across Canada and the Silk Road?
I haven't really run training. I've had knee meniscus issues over the years, and none of them from training, none of them from racing or training. It's all been construction related results or something traumatic, tear sort of thing. But I've been able to run, and all I've done for the last 20 years basically is just run our dog through the local trails. For the two dogs that we've had over that time frame. I haven't really done any run training. I bike everywhere. I hardly ever use a car in Vancouver. So I cycle commute everywhere that I go. And I swim regularly. That's my core thing, is I swim with a group, and in the odd time I ramp it up for an event like this that comes up. It's a lifestyle. Really, truly. It's not, I'm not out there trying to, I'm never going to be competitive to beat anybody in anything, really. I mean, if I get into a race, I'm sure I'm still, if I want to take a month and train up, I can do a 2:15 Olympic. A couple of years ago, I went 2:15, 2:25 on like a week's training.
Nice.
I just sort of went, okay, let's go out and do a little bit of time trial work. So I went out and did a couple of real hard time trials and just ramped up a little bit. And I can't remember what my time was. It was around there. And I don't know if I'd do that now. And I really don't have the desire to be honest. It was just somebody offered me a free entry into a triathlon. I thought, let's just go do it and have fun. And
but I'm guessing if you're down at the beach and you're out there swimming in the ocean and you see Barry Berg beside you, you're going to race a little bit.
No, you know what? Barry's pretty awesome, and he I cannot swim. I lose a second a year is what's been happening in the last 20 years. So when I was 40 years old, when I did Ultraman Canada, I could turn over on 110. Easily doing 100-meter swims. I could do sets on 115 and I'd pull off 110s regularly. Now I'm up at so what is that, 20 years later? I'm more like about a 130 now. And Barry's he's a good swimmer. He's strong, and I can't keep up to him. So there's no race at all. There is no race between Barry and I. I just throw a rope around him, get a tow. and I was a swimmer. I guess I am a swimmer and stuff. I was a backstroker. Actually, I was never really a very good freestyler, but I lose about a second a year. It's almost perfectly, every 5 years I'm doing a 5 second slower turnover. It's the best I can get.
Well, listen, Gerard, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your evening to record this with me and to share your stories with the listener, and to bring us in on some of these things that you've done in your past. And I think it was great for you to share your motto with us, because I think probably a lot of people who do ultra events can share with that, through adversity to the stars. So thanks so much for coming and sharing your stories.
No, it's a great trip down memory lane, and I love talking about some of the people in there. It's a lot of fun talking with you there, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview, and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, a production of 55 Enterprises.